Thank you. Thanks for holding this hearing, and I appreciate our witnesses today. And what a great opportunity we have before us. There is a big bowl of peanuts, as my colleague from Michigan just said, and that's a tax code that is outdated, antiquated, and broken. And it's no wonder. I mean, it goes back to the 1960s. Our tax code could qualify for AERP benefits on the international side. Many of the members on this panel, at least to my left, weren't even born when this thing was thought up, and it doesn't make any sense. And you look at the G7 countries, you know, all of them are territorial except us. And with all due respect, Dr. Shane, Dr. Klausing, I appreciate your testimony. I know you actually agree with a lot of what I think, at least in terms of base erosion rules, but we've got to catch up. I mean, at one point, we were the leader in terms of global tax policy. Now, you know, we're struggling to catch up. And it is hurting us, and it's hurting the workers I represent. And, you know, darn it, we got to figure this out as a committee. So, you know, Ian Wyatt recently came up with a study, Ernst & Young, saying there would be 47 companies, 4,700 companies that would be American companies today, just in the last 13 years, if we had a 20% rate in the territorial system, 4,700 countries. Laura Tyson, former chair of Council of Economic Advisors for President Clinton, just came out with her study showing that if you went to this kind of a policy we're talking about, 20% rate in territorial, it would result in $144 billion a year ongoing in repatriations coming back and about 154,000 jobs a year. And by the way, she said more in the short term because during the transition it would be even more positive. She's a Democrat. She looks at this and just says, well, this makes no sense. And companies are voting with their feet. Between 2003 and 2011, there were 7 inversions. Between 2012 and 2016, just in those 4 years, 33 inversions. And by the way, inversions are the tip of the iceberg. It really is not the bigger problem. The bigger problem is acquisitions. Foreign companies, as was said here today by Mr. Wells, I think all 4 of you agree with this, foreign companies have a huge advantage. They can pay a premium for U.S. companies. And, you know, it makes all the sense in the world that we'd be losing companies. So here are the numbers. In 2016, foreign acquisitions of U.S. companies was over 3 times greater than U.S. acquisitions of foreign companies. That's by deal volume. You could either look at that or look at the study Mr. Greenberg said, which is some German study he referenced, 17% more U.S. acquisitions of foreign companies we went to this. Others, it would flip, and the U.S. companies would have an advantage. Why does this matter? We did a study in the Permanent Subcommittee investigations. It was bipartisan. We all, you know, really drilled down into these inversions and acquisitions. What's really happening? I'm not from Missouri, but if I was on this committee, I would care a lot about this because when Anheuser-Busch decided to move overseas, they took 5,400 jobs with them. I mean, they did. And it's all documented. We have all the information. It's a study. You can look at it. We went behind the curtain in these corporate boardrooms to listen to what Mr. Wells talked about today, and I appreciate your candor. What goes on in these boardrooms, they want to be foreign companies for one simple reason, our tax code. And when they change their headquarters, they don't just move their situs, they move people and investment and commitment to the community. That doesn't include all the nonprofits and charitable institutions in St. Louis that lost out. So we've got to do this. We've got to fix it. And I know there are different ways to look at it. I get that, but I don't sense an urgency here today. And I hope that we can get to it. Now, in terms of this issue of balancing inbound and outbound, so you don't end up continuing to benefit foreign investment and foreign companies here, we do need to do something. It has to be balanced because we want FDI. It's important in my home state of Ohio. It's important in all of our states. But it's got to be a level playing field. And I think Mr. Greenberg has laid out some interesting ideas of how we can come up with a way to have that right balance where we're encouraging investment here. I want to ask you about outbound for a second because that's something we haven't talked about as much today. Professor Greenberg, countries that have a minimum tax system that was talked about by Dr. Klausing and Mr. Shea, France, Germany, Japan, the entire EU, by the way, starting in 2019 after they implement their new policies, they have a carve-out for active business exceptions. Can you comment on these European-style carve-outs and how you used to think about them when designing our own outbound base erosion rules?
Thank you for that question, Senator Portman. So territorial systems often have some rules for base protection that then allow an active business exception. The active business exception under EU law is incredibly narrow. In other words, you don't have to, all you need are 5 guys and a dog, okay? And the reason you only need 5 guys and a dog is because of this case called Cadbury-Schweppes out of the European Court of Justice that said that anything but wholly artificial arrangements has to be respected. And so the active business exception rule that is used in European jurisdictions is quite narrow, and we should understand that if we are thinking about having a similar rule in the United States. We would not want to create a rule that required a higher level of substance, because the problem with rules that say you only get deferral if you put substance in a foreign jurisdiction is that the higher the substance bar is, the more jobs you're asking to move offshore. So those active business exception rules are require a very limited amount of people activity, especially the EU ones, and one should be concerned if one writes a similar rule that the IRS would up the bar and effectively ask U.S. companies to put more people offshore in order to avoid a minimum tax, and that's a concern.
My time has expired. I appreciate the fact. Hope we have a second round. We can talk more about the outbound issues, but thank you very much.